Tonight, a cringeworthy true story from the world of medicine. I'm Richard.
And I'm Gary, and these are our incredible stories. Hello and welcome back to all of our listeners from around the world and across the United States. We're so happy to have you here with us today. And I'm telling you what, you're in luck because if you are a new listener, you have the opportunity to hit that like and subscribe button and join us every single week, every single Friday for a new and incredible story. And you can find us literally wherever you get your podcast from. And obviously, if you're listening to us, you're probably on whatever your favorite place is to listen to podcasts. So you can stick with that. That's fine. But sit back, relax, because I'm telling you right now, we have a really, what I think is a pretty incredible story. And like it was said in the intro, it's a little bit cringeworthy. It might have you going, ooh. So if medical science tends to get to you, this may not be your episode. but trust me when I say it is absolutely incredible. And if this discovery had not been made, it would have changed everything to do with modern-day medicine as we know it.
Yes, and I am going to just say that, Gary, in the course of telling this story this evening, I'm going to have difficulty not getting chill bumps myself. This is a pretty cringeworthy episode that we've located. And our main character is a German fellow by the name of Werner Forsman. Werner Forsman. He was born in Berlin, Germany, back in 1904. His dad was an attorney who died in World War I, and his mother, believe it or not, had the maiden name of Hindenburg. So she, I believe, was related to a very important figure in German history, von Hindenburg.
Isn't that also the balloon that crashed?
Zeppelin, yeah. Yeah, so his mother came from quite a prominent family. Now, he was raised as a Lutheran. That was one of the major religions in Germany at the time. Lutherans and Catholics pretty much had the majority of religious affiliation. And he studied medicine at the University of Berlin from 1922 to 1929. And in 1929, he received his medical degree. So he was employed at the August Victoria Surgical Clinic near Berlin in 1929 after graduation. And he started thinking about the theoretical basis of cardiac catheterization. Now, let's just pause a minute. Cardiac catheterization, that, Gary, involves passing a thin, flexible tube, which is called the catheter, into the heart, usually from the groin or the arm.
Yes.
The procedure is used for both diagnosis and treatment of coronary artery and heart disease.
I'm cringing over here right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a procedure that's done while you're awake.
Yeah. Into the heart, usually from the groin or arm, a thin, flexible tube. So Forsman was convinced that the technique could be highly beneficial in studying diseased living hearts through the measurement of the volume, rate of blood flow, pressure, oxygen content. And he also wanted to be able to deliver drugs quickly to the heart in emergencies via catheter, because at that time they weren't doing any such thing. They were using a very dangerous method of blind needle injection through the chest wall.
I'm having flashbacks to Pulp Fiction, where Uma Thurman's on the ground and they have to put the adrenaline right into her heart to keep her from overdosing. And
I am wringing my hands right now.
Oh my gosh! I don't know if we're going to survive this podcast.
This is pretty cringeworthy. I'm actually wringing my hands in front of the microphone as we speak. Let me see if I can get my imagination out of this mix and continue with the story.
It's hard not to visualize.
Oh. Now, back in 1929, everybody in the medical community believed that a catheter might become tangled in the heart's chambers and cause it to stop beating. So the clinic at Eberswalde in Germany, where Forsman worked, refused to sanction any such experiments by this young 25-year-old physician. Nevertheless, he practiced on cadavers, proving to his own satisfaction that he could successfully insert a catheter into the crook of an arm and advance it through a vein into the right side of the heart. Now, he was so convinced that the procedure would work that he persuaded a fellow resident to insert a large needle into a vein in his arm secretly at night, through which he then advanced a catheter toward his heart. However, fearful that Forsman might die, the colleague refused to continue, compelling the determined young man to temporarily abandon his self-experiment. But I don't know how far they got on this before his colleague just said, "Eek, enough is enough already."
Oh my gosh, yeah.
So inserting a large needle into a vein in Forsman's arm. So a week later, with only a nurse to assist him by holding a mirror so that he could observe the tube's progress on a fluoroscope, he tried again.
Oh.
He ignored his department chief and persuaded the operating room nurse in charge of the sterile supplies, her name was Gerda Ditzen, to assist him. She agreed, but only on the promise that he would do it on her rather than on himself. Can you imagine the doctor doing this on himself?
Oh, man.
Yeesh, that just makes my spine tingle.
Well, but for her to say, don't do it to yourself.
Yeah.
Go ahead, do it on me.
Yeah.
I mean, how well did they know each other? I mean,
don't know.
holy cow. I don't know. This experiment, I don't think I would voluntarily say, go ahead, stick a large needle in my arm and shove a tube up to my right ventricle.
Yeah, when people thought that, okay, maybe it'll get tangled and just stop your heart from beating. Mm-hmm. So she agreed, but on that promise. And, however, Forsman tricked her, Gary.
Oh, gosh.
So he restrained her on the operating table, and he pretended to locally anesthetize and cut into her arm while he was actually doing it on himself.
Oh, dear God.
He anesthetized his own lower arm in the cubital region and inserted a urinary catheter into his antecubital vein.
It wasn't previously used for urine
No.
purpose. Okay, good. So this was clean and sterile.
Yeah.
I mean, he was experimenting. We don't know what kind of lengths he went to.
He threaded it partly along before releasing Ditzen, and who at this point she realized the catheter was not in her arm, and telling her to call the X-ray department. Listen to this, Gary. They walked some distance to the X-ray department on the floor below, where, under the guidance of a fluoroscope, he shoved that catheter the full 60 centimeters into his right ventricular cavity of his heart. This was then recorded on X-ray film showing that the catheter was lying in his right atrium. Oh, my gosh. Now, the head clinician at Eberswalde, although initially very annoyed, he recognized that Werner's discovery when shown the X-rays. He allowed Forsman to carry out another catheterization on a terminally ill woman whose condition improved after being given drugs in this way. Think about it. After inserting 2 feet of tubing, which is the amount he thought was necessary to reach the heart. He didn't know for sure. He thought that would reach the heart.
That's a way to roll the dice, isn't it?
Walking into the X-ray room, the exterior portion of that tube was dangling from his arm, about 8 feet maybe. He instructed the radiologist to take a picture as photographic proof that the tip of the catheter was correctly located in his heart.
Oh, my God. Could you imagine?
And he was conscious this whole time?
Well, what I keep thinking is, what if that tube got snagged? Or somebody's like, "Oh, you have a loose string on your shirt," and they go to yank it. Or, oh,
Gary, every sense in my body at the moment is cringing.
yeah, you gotta think about these things. Somebody it's dangling too far. Somebody steps on it like a shoelace. It's just, oh, whew.
Well, he wrote about this incident in his autobiography.
Oh, did he?
Yeah. And later on, many years later, because he got into a lot of trouble at first.
Well, yeah.
So that year, the end of that year, November 1929, after he conducted this, what I would say, horrific experiment, but successful, he published the results of it as Die Sondierung des rechten Herzens, the exploration of the right heart. And he suggested that catheterization would prove invaluable for injecting radio opaque dyes to obtain heart x-rays for the identification of cardiac abnormalities and measuring blood pressure inside the heart. Now, unfortunately, like I say, this remarkable experiment was derided by his colleagues in Germany. Actually, they viewed his experiments as a circus stunt.
Ah, man.
And I imagine they cringed too when they heard about it. So his pioneering work led to nothing of immediate significance. Now, he got discouraged by the skepticism and the rejection that he was experiencing. So he turned to other work. So from 1931-32, he served under Germany's most renowned surgeon, Dr. Ferdinand Sauerbruch, his name is, at the Charité Hospital in Berlin. And if you want to know more about the Charité Hospital in Berlin, I think there are a couple movies running on Netflix about the Charité during World War II. And the Charité had an international reputation due to its innovative operations. But anyways, in 1933, Forstmann married Dr. Elsbeth Engel, a urologist, and he wasn't going anywhere in cardiology because he was really an outcast for having done what he did.
Yeah.
So he turned to urology, like his wife, and so both he and his wife were urologists for quite a while. Now, he had 6 children between 1934 and 43. He had 2 sons, Wolf and Bernd. Wolf became an atomist, and Bernd became a physicist. And during the 1930s, he was appointed chief of the surgical clinic of the city hospital at Dresden-Friedrichstadt and of the Robert Koch Hospital in Berlin. He joined the Nazi Party in 1932, and he remained a member until the end of the war in 1945. Now, it wasn't that he was ideologically a Nazi. You were required. If you were going to practice medicine or practice law or any of the professions we think of,
Yeah.
it was a requirement to be a member of the party, a dues-paying member of the party. You were required. Otherwise, you couldn't practice your profession. So all of the doctors, all of the surgeons in Germany at the time had to join the Nazi Party.
Wow.
Now, the Nazi Physicians League was an immediate success by the beginning of 1933. That's before the rise of Hitler to power. They had 2,786 doctors, but they joined the party earlier in great numbers than any other professional group. And so anyhow, like I say, it's not because Werner Forstmann was a Nazi. I guess technically you would have to say yes, because he belonged to a Nazi organization, but he was not a Nazi. He was a doctor. He was a medical doctor, and he was in that group because it was a requirement. And like I say, a crush of physicians had to join later on. Excuse me. By 1934, the waiting list had grown so long that physicians were told to refrain from any further applications until they could be processed.
Wow.
So from 1939 to 45, during World War II, Forsman served as a medical officer. He was a major in the German army, and he was captured by the Russians. But he escaped. He escaped from them and made it to an American prisoner of war camp. And then after his release after the war, he couldn't practice his profession anymore, and so he worked as a lumberjack of all things.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Cardiologist, urologist, lumberjack. That seems like the typical progression.
Yeah, right. That's incredible in and of itself. Now, then, after the war, that early publication that I mentioned earlier that he wrote,
Yeah.
it surfaced. It started to get read by people in the medical profession outside of Germany. And 11 years after the end of World War II, in 1956, it was so well read and accepted that he was nominated for and won the Nobel Prize for Medicine.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. So finally, he was recognized as the medical pioneer that he truly was. 1956, the Nobel Prize. He shared it with two other physicians, but never. That doesn't take away from the honor to go from a medical outcast where you can't even practice cardiology to where you're recognized with the Nobel Prize.
That is something else.
That is quite a journey. So by 1972, he felt the need to publish his autobiography, and that was in German, Selbstversuch. And that's Erinnerungen eines Chirurgen, that's Experiments in Myself, Memoirs of a Surgeon in Germany. And in this book, he not only talks about those heroic self-catheterization experiments, but he also provided a vivid picture of the German war campaign in Russia in which he served and of his dramatic escape across the Elbe River to the Americans. And then he also described the horrors of a military hospital outside Berlin during the final months of the war. So that autobiography of his was really an interesting eyewitness account from a unique vantage point in history.
Oh, absolutely.
And at one point during the war, he was stationed at the Brandenburg-Gurden Penitentiary in Berlin. That was in 1943. And scores of political prisoners were being beheaded by the guillotine at that time.
Oh, dear Lord.
And sometimes the guillotine was working so proficiently that victims were being guillotined at less than 2 minutes apiece.
Mm.
And Forsman tried to get the authorities to allow him to sedate the condemned prisoners, but they refused, and the prisoners could not be sedated before going to the guillotine. But he tried to get that humane procedure in place, but failed.
Wow.
So, although Forsman correctly predicted that catheterization could safely and successfully be used for diagnosis and treatment of heart ailments, like I say, it wasn't until after World War II that researchers in the United States, Britain, and elsewhere developed comprehensive practical applications of the method.
Isn't that something?
Yeah. And he and, like I say, he had 6 children, and then he died in Germany of heart failure, of all things, on 1st of June, 1979, and his wife died in 1993.
Wow.
However, one historian by the name of P.E. Baldry, in a book called The Battle Against Heart Disease, that came out in 1971, said this: "It was with much courage that these men performed," he was talking about others as well, "this investigation for the first time, as many of those around them considered they would be submitting their patients to unjustifiable risks, so that they well knew, therefore, that if anything untoward should happen, they would be subjected to the most stringent criticism. The immediate success of their method quickly silenced their critics, and before long it became an established diagnostic procedure in all cardiological units." Now, I'll say this: it didn't quickly, go away. He spent a major part of his lifetime rejected by the medical community.
Yeah.
It took a while to get the recognition he so richly deserved, but can you imagine what he had to do to prove something in medicine?
It is something else. It really is.
I'll tell you right now, it's not something I would do.
No. No. I mean, I just thinking about that whole story.
No.
It's just that to me is an incredible story.
Yes.
It really is. Now, on a side note to that, and you mentioned the guillotine, and since we're talking about people who self-experimented on themselves, interesting fact, there was a scientist who felt that the guillotine was inhumane because he believed that after the execution that the person who had been executed was not yet dead, because death is determined on brain activity, whether or not your brain is functioning. And he argued that the head was still alive for a good period of time afterward, but nobody believed him. And if I remember correctly, this man who worked with an assistant said, there's only one way to prove my theory is correct. So he had his assistant use a guillotine on him. He told him, I will blink, and however many blinks
my gosh.
I do.
This is suicide.
Yeah. But it was to prove a point. And he said, however many times I blink, I think it was like a blink per second is how long the brain continues afterward. And I believe it was 13 blinks. And it proved
life for 13 seconds after.
So it was not an immediate extinguishing. But the reason why I brought that up is because we're talking about somebody who sacrificed his health and safety to prove a point, to make a change.
Yeah.
And just coincidentally, these two stories are similar in that aspect. You have two scientists who wanted to prove a point, to make a change to something, because one thought, we could make life better by using this medical procedure, and another person who thought we can change something that is inhumane to make a difference. So both people put their lives on the line. One
of them sacrificed his life.
Quite literally, and the other for cardio. So, but fascinating stuff. But when you mentioned the guillotine part, that was one that had popped into my mind as something that had happened. A bizarre story. And I'm not sure if I have all of those facts correct. I'll have to look at it, but it was something that I remember from high school. Had a great high school history teacher who shared with us so many incredible stories, different things. In fact, when we did the one on the tomatoes, I think what was that last episode? I remember hearing that. Not all the details about it, but I do remember hearing the story of the man standing on the steps in front of everybody eating tomatoes, and everybody's like, "Oh, you're gonna die." No, it's just a tomato. Get over it. So, anyways, but oh my gosh, every time that's the second time I've heard that story, and every time I hear it, it's just, oh man, I can't believe something like that is possible. But it did happen. And in those early days of medicine, they had to figure out something somehow, because we didn't have computer models to help us. So it was all new territory.
We have to remember that back in the early days of colonial America, one of the accepted medical procedures was to put leeches on people to draw out diseased blood from the body. So medicine evolves over time based on a lot of experimenting.
That's true.
Yeah.
And it's funny because that procedure actually came back for a while in the late 90s, early 2000s.
And that's kind of cringeworthy when you think about it, too.
No, thank you.
Yeah.
Would you like us to put leeches on you to help you with your problem?
Pass.
Pass. Let's give something else a shot. So, well, again, that was an incredible story. And I can't wait to find out what we're going to be talking about next week. But until then...
I'm Richard.
And I'm Gary. And these are our incredible stories.